My daughter cut the brake lines on all the school buses. I'm the proudest mom ever. I got called to the police station at 6 a.m. because my 11-year-old Mia had destroyed all 3 district buses with bolt cutters she'd taken from my garage. When I arrived at the station, Mia was sitting in the chief's office with grease under her fingernails from the brake fluid. The principal was there screaming about expulsion and pressing criminal charges while our longtime bus driver Mr. Wilson stood by the door shaking his head in disappointment. "I can't believe sweet little Mia would do this," Mr. Wilson said, putting on his concerned grandfather act. "Such a good girl usually. I've driven her since kindergarten, given her candy on her birthday. Now the whole 5th grade misses their mountain field trip because of her vandalism." The depot manager showed photos on his phone of cut brake lines dripping fluid. "This is $200,000 in damages. Someone has to pay for this destruction." "Mia, what did you do?" I asked, feeling sick that my quiet daughter who helps me in my mechanic shop every weekend had done something so destructive. "I stopped Mr. Wilson from killing 30 kids, Mia said, staring straight at him. The room went completely silent. Mr. Wilson laughed, but it sounded nervous and forced. "Kids say the craziest things when they're in trouble. She's obviously making up stories to avoid consequences." "You drink vodka every morning before driving us to school," Mia said clearly. My stomach dropped to the floor while the principal said that was a very serious accusation to make. "I see him filling his thermos from a vodka bottle in his truck," Mia continued. "Every single morning for months. He parks behind the depot thinking nobody can see him, but I walk past there to school. That's something you should have told adults immediately," the chief said sternly. "I told the principal last month. He said I was mistaken, and Mr. Wilson just drank strong coffee." The principal's face went red. "You couldn't have been sure what you saw from that distance. I know what vodka bottles look like. Mom keeps them in the garage to clean engine parts. I help her every weekend." This was true because I taught her that trick for degreasing. My hands were shaking thinking about my daughter and son on a bus with a drunk driver every single morning for months. All those mornings I'd waved goodbye as she got on that bus, trusting she was safe. I said, "Mia, why didn't you tell me?" She just looked at me and said, "I didn't want to bother you when you're really busy at work," and my heart broke. "She's obviously lying to save herself," Mr. Wilson said, but sweat was dripping down his face now. "I have videos," Mia said, pulling out her phone. "Here's you drinking in your truck yesterday morning. Here's you stumbling to the bus last week. Here's you swerving into oncoming traffic Tuesday with kids screaming in the back." The chief took her phone and his face went pale watching the footage. "Jesus Christ, this is from 3 days ago. He's clearly intoxicated with children on board." I wanted to vomit right there. "These videos don't prove anything," Mr. Wilson said desperately, his voice getting higher. "And there's something else too," Mia said. Everyone stared at her. She showed us the weather alert on her phone from last night. Flash freeze overnight with black ice warnings for all mountain roads. The field trip was still scheduled. Today's route goes straight down Devil's Pass. It has 30-degree grades and turns that kill sober drivers. With black ice everywhere and Mr. Wilson drunk, our bus would go straight off the cliff. My little brother and 29 other kids would die today. "That's pure speculation," the principal said weakly, but he was staring at Mr. Wilson now. "Yesterday I heard Mr. Wilson tell another driver he wasn't canceling for the bad weather because he needed the overtime pay. He said he'd driven drunk in worse conditions and kids bounce anyway." The chief stood up from his desk. "Mr. Wilson, I need you to take a breathalyzer test right now." "This is ridiculous harassment," Wilson said, but he was already backing toward the door. "Now," the chief commanded. Wilson blew 3 times the legal limit at 7 in the morning. When they searched his truck, they found 3 empty vodka bottles under the seat and a half-empty one in the door panel. I felt rage I'd never experienced in my life. This man had been trusted with our children's lives. "You drove my babies drunk every single day for months? I waved to you every morning. 30 years driving without a single accident," Wilson slurred, swaying on his feet now. "You could have killed them," I screamed. "Every morning I put them on your bus trusting you." The depot manager was already on his phone. "The buses need special parts from the manufacturer. They're out for a week minimum. And you're fired immediately, Wilson." Wilson turned on Mia with pure hatred in his bloodshot eyes. "You little brat ruined everything. I needed this job for my bills. You were going to kill us today," Mia said simply. That's when Wilson lunged at my 11-year-old daughter, moving faster than any of us expected from someone that drunk. I threw myself forward without thinking, my shoulder slamming into Wilson's chest as 2 officers grabbed his arms from behind. He was yelling something about his pension and 30 years of service while they wrestled him back against the wall, his face red and spit flying from his mouth. My hands were shaking, so bad I could barely pull Mia behind me, feeling her small fingers grip the back of my jacket. The chief was already barking orders into his radio for backup, while the other officers pinned Wilson's arms behind his back, the handcuffs clicking loud in the suddenly quiet room. Wilson kept struggling and cursing, his breath reeking of alcohol even from 5 feet away, until they finally got him under control and started dragging him toward the door. The chief pointed at 2 officers and told them to take Wilson to holding immediately, then called for more units to come document everything. Within minutes, 2 more cops showed up, and the chief sent them straight out to the parking lot to photograph Wilson's truck before anyone could mess with the evidence. The depot manager was pacing back and forth with his phone pressed to his ear, canceling bus routes and calling drivers to tell them the whole week was shot. A female officer with kind eyes knelt down next to Mia and asked if she was okay, checking her arms and face real gentle to make sure Wilson hadn't hurt her when he lunged. Mia just nodded, completely calm like she'd expected him to blow up like that, while I stood there trying to process that a drunk had just tried to attack my 11-year-old kid in front of a room full of cops. The officer squeezed Mia's shoulder and told her she was very brave, then stood up and gave me a look that said she understood why I was so shaken up. After they'd hauled Wilson away, the The chief sat us back down and cleared his throat, saying we still had a serious problem to deal with. He explained that even though Wilson was clearly guilty of drunk driving and endangering kids, Mia had still destroyed $200,000 worth of school property. My stomach felt like it dropped through the floor when he said the prosecutor would have to decide whether to charge her with felony vandalism, and that kind of charge didn't just disappear because she'd been trying to do the right thing. I pulled out my phone with numb fingers and called my son's school, telling the secretary he wouldn't be taking the bus home today or any day this week. Then I texted my assistant at the shop that I was closing for the day due to a family emergency, knowing I'd probably lose money but not caring right then. The principal stood up and straightened his tie, his face all red and angry as he announced he'd be recommending Mia for expulsion regardless of what happened with the criminal charges. He said something about zero tolerance for vandalism and protecting the school's reputation before stomping out of the office, slamming the door so hard the blinds rattled. Everything was falling apart faster than I could keep track of, and I felt like I was drowning in all the consequences hitting us at once. The chief said we needed to give formal statements about everything that happened, and for the next 3 hours we sat in that stuffy room going over every detail again and again. They had me describe exactly when I'd arrived, what I'd seen, what everyone had said, while a detective typed everything into his computer. Mia had to explain again about the videos, about telling the principal, about watching Wilson drink every morning for months. The chief kept saying the prosecutor would review everything and make the final decision about charging Mia with felony destruction of property, and every time he said felony, I felt like I couldn't breathe. My baby girl could end up with a criminal record that would follow her the rest of her life, all because she'd tried to save 30 kids from dying on an icy mountain road. By the time we finally left the station, it was past noon, and my phone was blowing up with messages from other parents. The group chat for 5th grade was going crazy with people mad about the canceled field trip, saying their kids had been looking forward to it all year. Most of them didn't know the full story yet, and were blaming Mia for ruining everything, calling her a troublemaker and saying I should have to pay for new buses myself. Every few seconds, another angry message popped up. Parents complaining about having to find childcare now that buses weren't running, asking how one kid could cause so much damage. I turned my phone to silent but could still see the notifications piling up, knowing the whole town would be talking about us by dinner. Then a number I didn't recognize called, and when I answered, a man said his name was Alex Gray from the local paper. He asked if I wanted to comment on my daughter's arrest for vandalizing school buses, and I just hung up without saying anything. But I knew he'd write the story anyway, probably making Mia look like some crazy kid who went nuts with bolt cutters, and by tomorrow everyone in town would have an opinion about us. That evening after we got home, I went through Mia's backpack while she was in the shower and found a small notebook tucked in the inside pocket. Inside were pages and pages of dates and times, all in Mia's neat handwriting, documenting every time she'd seen Wilson drinking. October 3rd, 7:15 a.m. Wilson fills thermos from Smirnoff bottle in truck. October 5th, 7:10 a.m. Wilson stumbles getting into driver's seat, drops keys twice. She'd been watching him and writing it all down for 2 whole months, and there was even a note about telling the principal on November 8th, and him saying she must be mistaken. This wasn't some crazy impulse where she just grabbed bolt cutters and went wild. She'd been gathering evidence and trying to get help the right way first. I spent the rest of the evening calling every lawyer in the phone book, getting turned down by 3 who said they didn't do juvenile cases. Finally, I reached Janice Barnett, a defense attorney 2 towns over who said she'd handled cases like this before. She agreed to meet us first thing in the morning, but warned me that vandalism cases involving that much money got complicated real fast, and we'd need to build a strong necessity defense if we wanted to keep Mia out of the system. The next morning my phone rang while I was making breakfast, and the caller ID showed the district attorney's office. Christopher Lake introduced himself as the prosecutor reviewing Mia's case, and said he needed to discuss the situation with me directly. His voice was calm, but serious as he explained that while he understood this was an unusual circumstance, destroying $200,000 worth of property was still a crime regardless of the motivation. I gripped the phone harder and told him about the videos, about Wilson being drunk that morning, about the 30 kids who would have died on Devil's Pass. He said he'd review all the evidence but reminded me that we don't allow vigilante justice in this country, even when someone believes they're preventing a tragedy. I begged him to consider that Mia tried the proper channels first, that she told the principal who ignored her, that she was 11 years old facing an impossible situation. He said he'd make his decision within the week and hung up. That night after dinner, Mia was doing homework at the kitchen table when she suddenly pushed her books away and started sobbing. I rushed over and she buried her face in my shoulder, her whole body shaking as she cried that she didn't mean to cause so much trouble for everyone. She said she just knew nobody would listen until something terrible happened, that she'd been so scared every single morning getting on that bus with her little brother. Between sobs, she told me how Wilson would swerve and she'd grip the seat wondering if today was the day they'd crash. She said other kids noticed too, but everyone was afraid to say anything because Wilson was friends with all the adults. I held her while she cried herself out, feeling my own tears falling as I realized how alone she must have felt, carrying this fear for months. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing with news alerts about the bus drivers' union releasing an official statement. They were defending Wilson and claiming that Mia's vandalism had caused more danger than anything their member had allegedly done. The statement said that disabling safety equipment on the school buses put children at risk, and that one child's unproven accusations shouldn't destroy a man's 30-year career. I wanted to throw my phone across the room at their twisted logic, acting like Mia was the villain when Wilson had been driving drunk with kids every day. Then around noon, my phone rang from an unknown number, and when I answered, a muffled voice said they had information about Wilson. The caller wouldn't give their name, but said they were another driver who knew Wilson drank, but never reported it because there's an unspoken code about not ratting out coworkers. They said at least 3 other drivers saw Wilson drinking in his truck, but everyone kept quiet because they didn't want to be the snitch who got someone fired. Before I could ask questions, they hung up, leaving me staring at my phone, realizing this went way deeper than just one bad driver. Janice arrived at our house that afternoon with a briefcase full of legal documents and immediately started working on Mia's defense strategy. She spread papers across our dining room table and explained that our best shot was a necessity defense, arguing that Mia had no other reasonable choice to prevent immediate harm. She said Mia's age would help, and the fact that she'd tried reporting Wilson first was crucial, but the damages amount was a huge problem that prosecutors couldn't ignore. We spent 2 hours going through every detail of what Mia knew and when she knew it, with Janice taking notes about the timeline and asking for any documentation we had. She said we needed to prove beyond doubt that the danger was real, immediate, and that Mia had exhausted all other options before taking action. After Janice left, I decided to drive to the depot myself to verify Mia's story about seeing Wilson from the sidewalk. I parked across the street and walked the path kids take to the school, taking pictures with my phone of the employee parking area. Wilson's usual spot was clearly visible from the sidewalk, close enough that anyone walking by could easily see into a truck window. I took photos from different angles showing the principal's claim that Mia couldn't see properly was obviously false. The depot manager came out and told me to leave, but I'd already gotten the evidence we needed. 2 days later, Christopher Lake called again, requesting that all of Mia's phone videos be officially transferred for evidence. We had to go back to the police station where an IT specialist spent the entire afternoon extracting the files from Mia's phone and documenting the chain of custody. The IT person ran some program that analyzed the metadata and confirmed the videos were authentic, not edited or altered in any way. Each video was logged with its date, time, and GPS location, creating an official record of Wilson's pattern of drunk driving. Lake watched a few of the videos while we were there, and his face got more serious with each one. The following morning, I was in my shop working on an oil change when I saw a government car pull up to our house next door. 2 women in business suits knocked on our door, and when I ran over, they identified themselves as Child Protective Services investigating a report about child endangerment. Someone had called saying I let Mia have unsupervised access to dangerous tools and equipment that she used to commit a crime. I had to walk them through my shop, explaining how I always supervise when Mia helps me, showing them the locked tool cabinets and safety equipment. They took pictures of everything and asked dozens of questions about our routine, making me feel like a terrible parent even though I'd done nothing wrong. They said they'd need to interview Mia separately at the school and would be back for follow-up visits. That evening, I got a call from the superintendent, Marlene Wagner, about the emergency school board meeting scheduled for the next night. Parents were demanding answers about how a drunk driver stayed employed for months, and the board needed to address the situation publicly. Wagner asked me not to attend, saying our presence would be inflammatory and make things worse for everyone. I told her we had every right to be there since this affected our kids directly, and hung up on her. My phone immediately rang again with another parent calling to cancel their appointment at my shop, the third one that day. They said they didn't want a criminal's mother working on their car, that I'd obviously raised Mia wrong if she thought destroying property was acceptable. Word was spreading fast through our small town, and people were choosing sides, with some seeing Mia as a troublemaker who cost the district hundreds of thousands while others were starting to understand what she prevented. The financial pressure was building fast as more customers disappeared, and I started wondering how we'd pay for Janice's legal fees if my business dried up completely. The chief called me 2 days later with Wilson's official blood test results from that morning, and I nearly dropped the phone when he said .24, 3 times the legal limit at 7 in the morning. He told me in 30 years of police work he'd never seen someone that drunk that early who was still standing, let alone about to drive 30 kids down a mountain. The test was done at the hospital with proper chain of custody, so there was no way Wilson's lawyer could challenge it, and the chief said this confirmed everything Mia's videos showed was accurate. I drove straight to Janice's office with the test results, and she immediately filed a discovery request for all the bus depot's maintenance logs going back 2 years. The paralegal at the courthouse knew me from all my trips there for shop permits, and whispered that the depot was already scrambling to find their records since half of them were missing or incomplete. 3 days later, a courier delivered 4 boxes of maintenance logs to Janice's office, and we spent the entire afternoon going through them page by page. My hands started shaking when I realized that over half the safety inspection signatures from the past year were Wilson's, meaning he'd been signing off on brake checks and mechanical inspections while probably drunk. Janice took photos of every single page and said each signature was potentially criminal negligence that could help our case, since the depot should have noticed his handwriting getting worse over time. The next morning, I was buying milk at the grocery store when the principal's secretary approached me near the dairy section and slipped an envelope into my cart before walking away quickly. Inside was a printed email from 5 weeks ago, where the principal had told her to delete Mia's complaint from the computer system and make sure there was no paper trail. She'd kept a printed copy in her personal files at home because she knew it was wrong, and now we had actual proof of the cover-up that Janice said was worth its weight in gold for our defense. I was loading groceries into my truck when a parent I recognized from the school events cornered me in the parking lot, her face red with anger about the field trip money they'd lost. She kept saying her daughter had been looking forward to the mountain trip all year, and now it was ruined because of what Mia did, completely ignoring that her kid would be dead at the bottom of Devil's Pass if my daughter hadn't acted. I bit my tongue so hard it bled rather than scream at her that she should be thanking Mia for saving her daughter's life, not complaining about a $50 field trip fee. That afternoon, Alex Gray from the local paper published his article online, and for the first time it included the actual facts like the weather warnings showing black ice on all mountain roads, and Wilson's blood alcohol level from that morning. The comment section exploded with parents finally understanding what almost happened, and my phone started buzzing with private messages from families saying they supported us, even if they couldn't say it publicly. Christopher Lake called to tell me he'd gotten the bus depot's security footage from the past month through a warrant and wanted me to see it before making his charging decision. I sat in his office watching video after video of the bus swerving across the center line while Wilson stumbled up the steps each morning, and one clip from the previous week had kids screaming in the back as he nearly sideswiped a parked car. Lake paused the footage and pointed out that any one of these incidents could have killed children, and the district had cameras, but apparently nobody ever reviewed them. He said the insurance company had already launched their own investigation because they were looking at millions in potential lawsuits if it turned out the district knew about Wilson's drinking and did nothing to stop it. The principal had hired his own lawyer separate from the district's legal team, which Lake said meant he was trying to save himself by throwing everyone else under the bus. That evening, I was washing dishes when I heard a school bus drive past our house, and suddenly Mia ran into the kitchen shaking and crying uncontrollably. She kept saying she could smell the diesel and vodka even though the windows were closed, and I realized she was having a panic attack from months of riding that bus in fear every single morning. I held her on the kitchen floor for 20 minutes while she sobbed about how scared she'd been and how she'd counted the bottles in Wilson's truck every day, wondering if today would be the day he killed them all. The next morning, Janice filed a motion with the court arguing that Mia had acted under imminent necessity to prevent mass casualties on that field trip. She attached the weather reports showing the black ice warnings, Wilson's blood test results proving he was severely drunk, the principal's email about deleting Mia's complaint, and frame grabs from the bus videos showing near misses. Janice said this was our best shot at avoiding criminal charges because it showed Mia had no other choice after the adults failed to protect the children. 2 weeks later, we sat in the courthouse for Wilson's arraignment and learned from his lawyer that he'd lost his wife to cancer 6 months ago and started drinking to cope with the grief. The lawyer tried to paint him as a victim of circumstances, but the judge wasn't having it, saying that grief doesn't excuse endangering children's lives every single day for months. I felt a tiny bit of sympathy thinking about him losing his wife, but it disappeared when I remembered him lunging at Mia in the police station, and all those mornings he could have killed my children. 3 days after the arraignment, parents started calling me nonstop about Wilson. A mom named Sarah showed me an email she'd sent the principal 3 months ago saying Wilson smelled like alcohol when he helped her kid off the bus. Another parent had filed a written complaint about Wilson swerving into the bike lane while dropping kids off. The principal never responded to any of them. I sat at my kitchen table reading complaint after complaint that parents forwarded to me. One dad had called the district office 6 times about Wilson running red lights with kids on board. The secretary told him she'd pass it along, but nothing ever happened. Another mom had a video from last year of Wilson stumbling at the school pickup line. She'd shown it to the vice principal, who said Wilson just had bad knees from his age. By the end of the week, I had 17 different complaints from parents that the school ignored. Janice said this pattern of negligence would destroy the district in court. The next morning, the district's lawyer called me directly. He offered to pay all our legal fees if we signed papers saying we wouldn't sue the district. He kept saying they wanted to make this right and help Mia through the legal process. Janice listened on speakerphone and wrote notes while he talked. He said the district's insurance company was worried about liability and wanted to settle everything quickly. They'd cover Janice's fees plus any court costs if Mia got charged. Janice mouthed the words, "Take it," while he was still talking. After we hung up, she explained that juvenile defense could cost $20,000 or more. The district was basically admitting fault by offering this deal. We signed the papers that afternoon at Janice's office. That night at dinner, Mia asked if she could speak at the school board meeting coming up. She'd been quiet for days, but now she looked determined. Janice was there going over paperwork and said it was risky because anything Mia said could be used against her in court. But it might also show the board that her motivations were pure, and she was trying to save lives. We spent the next 2 evenings practicing what Mia would say. Janice helped her write it out, and we went over it again and again. "Keep it simple and true," Janice kept saying. "Just tell them why you did it and that you tried to tell adults first." Mia practiced in front of the mirror until she could say it without crying. 2 nights before the meeting, I was closing up the shop when I heard glass breaking. Someone had thrown a brick through my front window with a note tied to it. The note said, "Your daughter is a criminal who cost us thousands in field trip money." I called the police and filed a report, but the officer said without cameras they probably wouldn't find who did it. I swept up the glass and boarded up the window with plywood from my garage. The next morning, I opened the shop like normal, even though customers could see the damage. 3 regular customers canceled their appointments that week. Meanwhile, the bus drivers union released a statement saying Mia's videos were obviously edited to make Wilson look bad. They demanded an expert review them to prove tampering. Christopher Lake ordered a forensic analyst to examine all the footage. The analyst's report came back 2 days later, and it was worse for Wilson than anyone expected. Not only were the videos completely unaltered, but the analyst found details we'd missed. In one video, Wilson's eyes were closed for 3 full seconds while driving. Another showed him drinking from a flask while kids were boarding. The union went silent after that report came out. While going through district records for Janice, I found something that made me sick. The depot manager had eliminated random drug testing 2 years ago. The budget showed he'd cut it to save $8,000 a year. Federal law required testing for anyone driving kids, but he'd figured nobody would check. Now he was facing his own criminal charges for endangering children. His lawyer was already trying to make a deal with the prosecutor. Christopher Lake called Janice and said he was leaning toward a diversion program for Mia. She'd have to do community service and pay some restitution but wouldn't get a criminal record. He said Mia's age and the clear danger she prevented made formal charges seem wrong. We were scared to hope, but Janice said this was the best possible outcome. That same week, my son started waking up screaming about buses going off cliffs. He wouldn't let me drive anywhere near Devil's Pass on the way to the school. Every morning he asked if Mia was going to jail, and if Wilson would come back to hurt us. I found him hiding under his bed one night because he heard a bus outside. The therapist said the whole family was dealing with trauma from learning how close they'd come to dying. My son had ridden that bus every day thinking he was safe. The night of the school board meeting, the auditorium was packed with angry parents. They'd all heard different pieces of the story, but nobody knew everything. The board president called the meeting to order and said they'd address the Wilson situation first. They dimmed the lights and started playing Mia's videos on the huge screen at the front. Parents gasped when they saw Wilson stumbling up the bus steps. A mom in front of me started crying when the video showed him swerving while kids screamed in the back. Another video showed him running a stop sign with the bus full of elementary schoolers. By the time they'd played all 12 videos, the whole room was dead silent. Parents were grabbing their kids' hands and several were crying. The board president asked if anyone wanted to speak and Mia stood up. She walked to the microphone at the front, even though her hands were shaking. She pulled out her paper and started reading in a clear voice. She said she'd told the principal about Wilson drinking, but he didn't believe her. She said she knew cutting brake lines was wrong, but the field trip was that morning, and 30 kids, including her brother, would have died on Devil's Pass. She said she tried to do the right thing first, but nobody listened to an 11-year-old kid. She said she was sorry for the damage and the money it cost, but she wasn't sorry for saving lives. When she finished, half the parents were crying and several started clapping until the board president called for order. The superintendent stood up and walked to the microphone while the board president tried to restore quiet in the room. She cleared her throat and announced the principal was suspended immediately pending a full investigation into his failure to act on safety concerns. The crowd erupted again with parents shouting questions about who knew what and when. She raised her hand for silence and continued that new safety protocols were starting next week, including random drug testing for all drivers and staff with driving responsibilities. The depot manager nodded from his seat in the front row and added they'd already ordered testing kits for immediate implementation. It felt like progress, but way too late for all the mornings our kids had been in danger. 2 days later, Christopher called to say he'd made his decision about charges against Mia. I sat down at my kitchen table with my heart pounding while he explained he was offering a diversion program instead of formal prosecution. 100 hours of community service teaching bike safety to younger kids, plus $5,000 in restitution to the district for the damaged buses. If she completed everything within 6 months, there would be no criminal record at all. Janice was on speakerphone and immediately said we should accept the deal right away before he changed his mind. I asked Mia what she thought, and she nodded, saying she wanted to teach kids about safety anyway. Christopher emailed the paperwork that afternoon and we signed everything before dinner. The next morning, I was loading supplies into my truck at the shop when the principal appeared in the parking lot. His face was red and he started yelling that I'd ruined his 30-year career over a simple misunderstanding. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshot of his secretary's email proving he'd ordered Mia's complaint deleted from the system. He went pale and stepped back but kept insisting he'd just been trying to avoid unnecessary drama. I told him 30 dead kids on Devil's Pass would have been a lot more drama than one complaint about a drunk driver. He turned and walked away without another word, and I never saw him again after that. A week passed before Wilson's sister called saying his lawyer wanted to discuss something important. She explained Wilson was finally admitting he had a problem and wanted treatment instead of jail time. They were asking if we'd support a plea deal for probation with mandatory rehab, since it was his first offense. I sat there holding the phone not knowing what to say, because part of me wanted him punished. But I also knew addiction was a disease that needed treatment. Mia overheard and said Wilson needed help more than prison, and maybe getting sober would stop him from hurting anyone else. I told his sister we wouldn't oppose treatment if the court banned him from any job involving children forever. 3 weeks later, we sat in juvenile court for Mia's official hearing on the diversion program. The judge reviewed all the evidence, including the videos and the weather reports from that morning. He approved the program and explained Mia would write apology letters to the district and complete her service hours at the community center. She'd already started planning her first bike safety class with drawings and everything. The judge smiled and said he wished more kids had her courage to speak up when adults failed them. We left the courthouse feeling like we could finally breathe again after weeks of uncertainty. Wilson's hearing happened the following month and he pled guilty to 30 counts of child endangerment. The judge gave him 2 years probation with mandatory rehab at a facility 2 hours away. He lost his commercial license permanently and was banned from any employment involving minors for life. His lawyer said it was better than the 5 years in prison he could have gotten. I watched him shuffle out of court looking 20 years older than when this started. The principal's resignation letter appeared in the paper that same week, saying he was retiring to spend time with family. The district wouldn't press charges for the cover-up, but made it clear his education career was over everywhere. He'd never work in another school or even substitute teach. Sometimes losing your profession and reputation was punishment enough without jail time. Over the next few months, our small town slowly started healing from everything that happened. Some parents came up to me at the grocery store apologizing for their angry messages when they first heard about the buses. Others still thought Mia should have been prosecuted fully, and made that clear with cold stares when we passed them. We learned to live with both reactions and focus on moving forward. The safety workshop started that spring with Mia teaching groups of 8 and 9-year-olds how to document concerns properly. I helped her make handouts about finding trusted adults who would actually listen when something felt wrong. We showed them how to take videos safely and keep records of dates and times. Parents started attending too and asking questions about what signs to watch for. It became our way of turning something terrible into something useful for other families. My shop slowly got busier as the scandal faded from daily conversation. A few customers actually started coming more often, saying they respected what Mia did to protect those kids. We weren't making as much money as before everything happened, but we were surviving. The bills got paid and we could afford groceries without worry. Sometimes that's all you can ask for after your world gets turned upside down. 6 months passed with Wilson finishing his rehab program at the facility upstate. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was eating breakfast with Mia before school. The return address showed the treatment center's name, and I recognized Wilson's shaky handwriting on the envelope. Mia saw it too, and asked if she could open it since it was really meant for her. Inside was 2 pages of Wilson's apology written in blue pen with several crossed-out words where he'd struggled to find the right ones. He thanked Mia for stopping him before he killed someone, and said he'd been sober for 182 days now. He wrote about losing his wife to cancer, and how the drinking started as a way to numb that pain before spiraling out of control. He said he knew that wasn't an excuse for endangering children, but wanted us to understand he never meant to hurt anyone. The last paragraph said he was staying at a halfway house near the treatment center, and had a job stocking shelves at night where he couldn't hurt anybody. Mia read it 3 times, then got out her notebook and started writing him back. She kept it simple, just saying she was glad he was getting help and hoped he stayed sober. I mailed it for her that afternoon. The district had hired 5 new drivers who all had to pass background checks and monthly drug tests. Parents could log into a website anytime to see the test results with dates and signatures from the lab. The transparency helped even though half the families still drove their kids instead of using the buses. Each driver also had to wear a body camera that uploaded footage to the cloud every day. The depot installed breathalyzers that drivers had to blow into before starting their routes. If they didn't pass, the bus wouldn't start, and an alert went straight to the superintendent's phone. They also put GPS trackers on every bus, so parents could watch the routes in real time. Some people said it was too much, but nobody complained after what almost happened. Mia finished her 100 hours of community service 2 weeks early because she kept showing up for extra sessions. The judge called us into his office on a Thursday afternoon to officially close her case. He stamped the paperwork and told Mia he was proud of how she'd handled everything. She'd taught 43 kids about bike safety and how to document problems properly. The community center director said Mia could keep volunteering if she wanted, and she signed up for the next session immediately. She'd made little cards for the kids with important phone numbers and a checklist for gathering evidence safely. The director started using them in all the safety classes after that. My son took 3 months before he'd get on a bus again, even with all the new safety stuff. The first day back, he threw up from nerves before we even got to the bus stop. The new driver was a retired firefighter named Tom, who understood why kids were scared. He let my son sit right behind him and showed him the breathalyzer and cameras. After that first ride without problems, we went straight to the ice cream shop and got double scoops to celebrate. He still sat behind the driver every day, but at least he was riding again. The district loved Mia's idea for an anonymous reporting app, so much they had it built within 2 months. Kids could report anything that felt unsafe directly to monitors outside the district who would investigate within 24 hours. The app let them upload photos or videos as evidence and track what happened with their report. 3 other districts heard about it at a conference and asked for the code to make their own versions. Within a year, 12 districts across the state were using some version of Mia's reporting system. The school held their end-of-year awards ceremony in the gym with all the parents packed into plastic chairs. When they called Mia up for the Citizenship Award for Moral Courage, half the audience stood up clapping. These were the same parents who'd wanted her expelled 6 months earlier. The principal's replacement gave a speech about standing up for what's right even when it's hard. Mia just stood there holding her plaque, looking uncomfortable with all the attention. I took a picture anyway because I wanted to remember that moment. Some parents came up afterwards saying they were wrong about Mia and apologizing for the angry messages. We just nodded and said thank you because what else could we do? Our family started having weekly meetings every Sunday after dinner where everyone could bring up anything bothering them. No topic was off limits and nobody got in trouble for sharing concerns. My son talked about nightmares he still had about buses crashing. Mia mentioned feeling guilty about the principal losing his job even though he'd ignored her complaint. I shared how scared I'd been about losing the shop and not being able to provide for them. These talks brought us closer than we'd ever been before everything happened. By the time school started again in the fall, life felt almost normal. Mia walked to middle school now, so no more buses for her. My shop had more customers than before the whole scandal, and I'd even hired a part-time helper. We didn't talk about that morning at the police station much anymore, but sometimes I'd catch Mia checking the bus safety app she'd helped create. I was proud my daughter found the courage to act when every adult around her failed to protect those kids. Thanks for letting me wonder alongside you through all of this today. It's definitely been interesting sharing these moments together. Take care. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.